Hello everyone, in this little lesson we'll have an overview of curriculum development in English language teaching. First of all, it is important to mention that as a teacher you always have two main questions. The first one is concerned with what to teach, and the second corresponds to how to teach it. So every time that you face a new job or a new situation, you have these two questions in mind. Or even at the beginning of each course, these are the main questions that you ask yourself. Now, of course, that depending on the approach that we advocate on the things that we like as teachers, there are going to be a number of decisions that we're going to make. So I want you to think about these statements that I'm about to list, and I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree with them. First of all, some people think that teachers and students should always use the target language for classroom interaction. Secondly, some others say that it's important to use technology for teaching English. In a similar way, some people say that to learn a language, you must study its grammar and learn its vocabulary. And some others believe that textbooks are useless and they prefer to use authentic materials. Some other teachers believe that the students' learning must be carefully measured with tests. So people think that in order to assess the students' competence, it is necessary to administer exams. And of course, some others argue that the best teaching methodology is the communicative approach. And some others believe that it is important to establish clear objectives in terms of students' performance. Concerning the content, some people think that it must address the communicative function that learners will face in real context. And of course, some others believe that it's better to use alternative assessment instruments such as portfolios instead of tests because this helps to reduce the student stress. So, we can say in short that depending on your approach, on your teaching a background, you're going to decide on whether or not to do each of these things. But it is always a matter of decisions that will have an impact on teaching. Now, when we face the question of what to teach and how to teach it, there are some basic guidelines that come from our discipline. We call these the internal or disciplinary guidelines. So we base on theory developed in applied linguistics and language teaching, and then we normally come up with something that we know as an approach, which is basically a theory of language and a theory of language learning. In other words, these approaches tell us what language is, how we can define the language, and also how people learn languages. According to the approach that you select, the elements that you're going to teach, that is the definition of language, will be different. And similarly, depending on the theory of language learning that you advocate or that you support, you will adopt different ways for teaching this content. Having said that, let us now review the 10 most important principles for instructed language acquisition that we have learned in the past decades. If we were to summarize all of the theory that has been developed in applied linguistics, we will say these 10 statements. First of all, that learners should develop both a rich repertoire or formulaic expressions and a rule-based competence. So this means that even though we can teach the students grammar rules, there are some parts of the language that they will learn all together as chunks, as formulas, because this is the way language works. Number two, the learners should focus predominantly on meaning. That means that when we teach the language, an important focus should be on the meaning that is intended to convey. Number three, the learner should also focus on form. So this means, however, some people may not like it, that there is an important place for grammar, for the structures, for the way that the language works. The fourth principle tells us that instruction needs to be predominantly directed at developing implicit knowledge of the second language while not neglecting explicit knowledge. This means that sometimes it is okay to tell how the language works, and sometimes it is just easier to show the students the way we say things without explaining why they work the way they work. Number five, instruction needs to take into account the learner's built-in syllabus. So this means that according to the second language acquisition theories, there is a specific way, a specific order of acquisition that sometimes cannot be altered. So we need to respect this learner's built-in syllabus. Number six, we know now that successful instruction requires extensive L2 input. So this means that students must be continually exposed to meaningful samples of the target language. That means listening, reading in the target language. And this theory has also taught us that successful instruction also requires output. So this means that there must be a place in every lesson for providing opportunities for the student to express him or herself, that they have to speak. To learn the language, you need to speak it, you need to produce something. Number eight, interaction is central in the development of L2 proficiency. So we're saying not only do students have to listen and read and speak and write, but they also have to interact with other people because negotiation of meaning or interaction is very important for successful acquisition. Number nine, instruction needs to take into account the individual learner differences. So we need to acknowledge that all of the learners are different. We cannot teach in just one way because every learner will have the favorite or the preferred learning styles, learning strategies, their own motivations, and we need to take all of these into account. Finally, we need to recognize that when assessing L2 proficiency, we need to take into account both free and controlled production. So this means that not only do we have to give multiple choice tests where they give us just a little element of the language, but we also need to test the language using free production in which the students can express themselves in a free way, and then we can assess their proficiency in a more accurate way. Now, those things that we mentioned before are the things that we know from a theory. Those are the internal guidelines. But now, what are the other factors that affect what we teach and how we teach it that come from outside? We call these external guidelines. And basically, we can mention the demands because when we teach, there are some rules or some principles or some guidelines that are imposed or proposed by governments or maybe by the educational authorities who tell us the way we have to do things, but it could also be employers. Sometimes you teach in a school and they tell you what you have to teach and how you have to teach it. And finally, there is also some demands on the part of the learners. This means that learners have interests and needs that you need to satisfy in a given teaching situation. Now, how do these external guidelines influence our teaching? There is also a list of demands that are general for all educational programs. For example, people in general, governments, authorities, employers, students, they want results or outcomes that can be achieved fast and efficiently. Okay? So they want learning to be fast and effective. Number two, they also want you to teach them the language that can be used to access content and information. So this means that they require things that are going to be useful to them for their everyday lives. And also, employers and institutions require the potential for delivery of the teaching content to large numbers of learners, both face to face, the way we used to do before the epidemic, and also distant, which is the way in which we are learning right now. Another guideline that is external specifies that the materials that we use must be delivered also in self-access mode. That means that the students should have the materials accessible anytime that they need them without the help of the teacher. Number five, there should also be opportunities for using technology and the internet. Today, we acknowledge that learning can be improved and it can be enhanced, and the students can practice if they have access to technology and the internet. Number six, successful teaching also provides opportunities for the content and situation specific learning. This means that sometimes we're going to teach to doctors and they're going to have special needs. Sometimes we're going to teach to tour guides and they're going to have specific needs. Sometimes we're going to teach to children and they're going to have their own needs and interests. So learning has to be contextualized. Number seven, a successful program has to enable learners to self-manage their own learning. So this is a very important thing. We recognize today that an effective program is one that helps the students to learn by themselves. And finally, number eight, we also need to focus on domain-specific language use. This means that sometimes we're going to have to use specific language concerning specific disciplines according to the public that we're teaching to. So all of these general principles are the ones that are demanded on the teacher, that are required by people in order to have successful learning experiences. The last set of external requirements are as follows. First of all, successful learning has to promote skills that are needed to access authentic materials. So this means that we need to use in class materials that are authentic, that resemble the kind of things that students are going to see in real life. So this means listening to news reports, reading articles from newspapers, watching documentaries. because all of these materials are important for learners. Number 10, successful learning also has to promote problem solving and critical thinking skills. So, there is an important part of learning that has to do with the development of the learner's thinking skills. Now, the 11th principle tells us that the results that we obtain have to be performance based. So, this means that we're not looking to develop only knowledge that can be tested on paper. We want to develop competences that can be seen, that can be applied, that can be put into practice by the learners. And finally, the assessment should be linked to task performance. So this last one means that if we are to assess or to measure the students' performance, we have to do it by means of task. They have to show us that they are capable of communicating in the language in order to perform specific tasks. So this last set of principles give us some directions as to how we need to do things in the classroom in order to do language successful, because the people who are hiring us or the students themselves are going to require results from the time spent in learning the language. Now, just to summarize that, we said that one important task facing the teacher is to decide what to teach and how to teach it. And we also said that there are internal and external guidelines. That means that if we're going to develop a program, a curriculum for language teaching, we need to see the theory in applied linguistics and English language teaching to see what are the things that provide successful experiences. But on the other hand, we're also going to look at the demands from the stakeholders. That means the authorities, the employers, and the students, because they will tell us what they need to develop in order to make an effective use of the language that they're going to learn in our courses. We call this the means, or how, and the outcomes, the what. Now that we have laid out the main reasons why we need curriculum development in order to guide us answering the questions as to what to teach and how to teach it, let's turn to two important concepts for this course: curriculum and syllabus. What is a curriculum? What is a syllabus? This is you right now with lots of questions in your mind. Let's look at the definitions. Let's begin with the definition of curriculum. A curriculum, ladies and gentlemen, is an educational program which usually states, number one, the purpose of the program in terms of aims or goals, the content of the program and the sequence in which it will be taught, we call that the syllabus. Number three, the teaching procedures and learning activities, and we call that the methodology. Number four, a curriculum also contains the means that are used to assess student learning. We call this assessment and testing. And finally, a curriculum also includes the means that are used to assess whether the program has achieved its goal, and we call this evaluation. Now, if we turn to the definition of syllabus, we will see that a syllabus is nothing but a description of the contents of a course of instruction and the order in which they are to be taught. Language teaching syllabuses may be based on different criteria. For example, the grammatical items or vocabulary. We call this a structural syllabus. They could also be based on the language that is needed for different kinds of situations, and we call this a situational syllabus. A syllabus can also contain the meanings and the communicative functions which the learner needs to express in the target language. We call this a notional syllabus. And also, a syllabus may include the skills underlying different language behavior or text types that the learner needs to master. Let's turn now to our last definition, curriculum development, which is the name of this course. Curriculum development is used to refer to the processes that are used to determine the needs of a group of learners, to develop aims or objectives for a program, to address those needs, to determine an appropriate syllabus, course structure, teaching methods and materials, and to carry out an evaluation of the language program that results from these processes. So basically, when you do curriculum development, you make a lot of decisions about how you're going to teach and what contents you're going to teach, but also you make decisions concerning the methodology, the materials, and the way the learners will be assessed or tested, and the way in which the program will be evaluated. This is curriculum development, and this is what we're going to learn in this course. Then, curriculum development is a very important process that will guide us in making decisions about what to teach and how to teach it. This means that we need to establish, first of all, a syllabus that specifies the content that is going to be taught and the specific sequence in which it's going to be taught. Secondly, we need to establish goals and objectives for the students, the courses, and the program itself. On the other hand, we also need to select or specify a methodology that will be used in order to achieve those objectives and to cover that content, as well as a number of materials and resources that will be used to achieve the goals. Finally, we need to establish a number of evaluation, assessment, and testing procedures in order to measure the effectiveness of the students, the courses, and the program itself. So this was a brief overview of curriculum development. Well, I hope that now you have a little idea of what curriculum development is about, and we'll be meeting again